Well, hello again, and welcome to the final installment of Cory Doctorow's Eastern Standard Tribe here in my podcast. I'm Cory Doctorow, reading my novel Eastern Standard Tribe, published by Tor Books in 2004 by Tor Books. I already said that. And available for free on the internet as well as in finer bookstores everywhere. So yeah, I'm going to read you the last couple of chapters today, and then I'm moving on to a new special project, which I'll get to in a minute. So I had a great weekend in Las Vegas. It was a nice little holiday. I was actually reviewing some hotels, as I mentioned. At least one of those hotels was superb. On the other hand, it cost as much for one night there as it does for a whole month's rent here in Los Angeles. So I don't know that I would have ever stayed there on my own. But boy, if you're ever looking to blow a month's rent on a night in a hotel, I can tell you the MGM Skylofts, which come with a butler, are certainly worth it. I had 2 nights there for free, courtesy of the review guide I work for, and boy, was it ever nice. Next week, I'm off to San Diego for the O'Reilly Emerging Technologies Conference. I've been going to this since it was the O'Reilly Peer-to-Peer Conference. In fact, the company I co-founded, OpenCola, was a platinum sponsor of that first peer-to-peer conference, and I've been on all the conference juries ever since. So I've got a real soft spot in my heart for it. I'm presenting this week at this eTech with Peter Biddle, the trusted computing architect for Microsoft, and we're presenting jointly on DRM. I'm presenting the case for DRM, and he's presenting the case against DRM, and then we're going to have a little debate. I think that'll be really fun. I'm also, while I'm there, I've set up a signing with a local great science fiction bookstore called Mysterious Galaxy at 6:30 p.m. on the 29th. That's Thursday. So I hope I might see some of you there. It's just going to be a little drop-in, not a big deal, but it'll be nice to run into you if you happen to be in the neighborhood. Other news. Well, the Little Brother manuscript is back. It's finished. It's at Tor. It's in copy editing, and it's called Little Brother again. If you follow the saga here of my young adult novel about hacker kids who fight the Department of Homeland Security, you know that for a while this book was called Homeland. It's no longer called Homeland for reasons that are too complicated to get into. It's called Little Brother again. Anyway, I'm happy with that. And IDW is adapting 6 of my stories for comic books. And so the 6 comics are going to be iRobot, After the Siege, When Sysadmins Ruled the Earth, NIMBY and the D-Hoppers, and Craphound. You've heard all of those stories here on this podcast, of course. And when they're done as the 6 individual issues, they're going to be bound together in one big volume, a kind of anthology. I'm really excited about that. I've never had my work adapted for comics, really, and it's so cool. And now, finally, the special project. My next reading for you is not going to be one of my own pieces. The next couple weeks that I do podcasts in, I'm going to be reading a really special and great document called a cost analysis of Microsoft security measures in Vista by a security researcher in New Zealand named Peter Gutman. This came out before Christmas last year, and it really is one of the best descriptions of what's wrong with DRM, in particular what's wrong with what Microsoft's doing with DRM, that I've ever read. And a listener suggested that I should ask Peter to read it aloud, and Peter said that he was too busy, but he graciously gave me permission to read it aloud, so I'm going to read it aloud and put it in the podcast, and then after that we'll see what I get to. So without further ado, here is the final installment of Eastern Standard Tribe. Chapter 27. I have wished for a calm 100,000 times since they stuck me in this shithole, and now that I have one, I don't know who to call. Not smart, not happy. I run my fingers over the keypad, think about all the stupid, terrible decisions I made on my way to this place in my life. I feel like I could burst into tears, like I could tear the hair out of my head, like I could pound my fist bloody on the floor. My fingers, splayed over the keypad, tap out the old nervous rhythms of the phone numbers I've known all my life. My first house, my mom's comm, Gran's place. Gran. I tap out her number and hit the commit button. I put the phone to my head. Gran? Arthur? Oh, Gran. Arthur, I'm so worried about you. I spoke to your cousins lately. They tell me you're not doing so good there. No, I'm not. The stitches in my jaw throb and counterpoint with my back. I tried to explain it all to Father Ferlinghetti, but I didn't have the details right. He said it just didn't make any sense. It doesn't. They don't care. They just put me here. He said that they should have let you put your own experts up when you had your hearing. Well, of course they should have. No, he said they had to, that it was the law in Massachusetts. He used to live there, you know. I didn't know. Oh, yes, he had a congregation in Newton. That was before he moved to Toronto. He seemed very sure of it. Oh, why was he living in Newton? Oh, he moved there after university. He's a Harvard man. I think you got that wrong. Harvard doesn't have a divinity school. No, this was after divinity school. He was doing a psychiatry degree at Harvard. Oh, my. Oh, my. What is it, Arthur? Do you have Father Ferlinghetti's number, Gran? A little auctorial aside here. Many people have written to say that Harvard does in fact have a divinity school. Well, of course it does in the present, but not in the future. Chapter 28. Tanya Isaya's Kubrick figure face paint distorted into wild grimaces when Art banged into O'Malley House, raccoon-eyed with sleep-debt, airline crud crusted at the corners of his lips, whole person quivering with righteous smitefulness. He calmed the door savagely and yanked it so hard that the gas lift snapped with a popping sound, like a metal ruler being whacked on a desk. The door caromed back into his heel and nearly sent him sprawling, but he converted its momentum into a jog through the halls to his miniature office. The last 3 times he talked to Fede, the bastard had been working out of his office, stealing his papers no doubt, though that hadn't occurred to Art until the plane was somewhere over Ireland. Fede was halfway out of Art's chair when Art bounded into the office. Fede's face was gratifyingly pale, his eyes thoroughly wide and scared. Art didn't bother to slow down, just slammed into Fede, bashing foreheads with him. Art smelled a puff of his own travel sweat and Fede's spicy lilac vegetal, saw blood welling from Fede's eyebrow. "Hi, pal," he said, kicking the door shut with a crash that resounded through the paper-thin walls. "Art, Jesus fucking Christ, what the hell is wrong with you?" Fede backed away to the far corner of the office, sending Art's chair over backwards, wheels spinning, ergonomic adjustment knobs and rods sticking up in the air like the legs of an overturned beetle. "Toonpay Inc., Art said, booting the chair into Fede's shins. "Is that the best fucking name you could come up with? Or did Toby and Linda cook it up?" Fede held out his hands, palm first. "What are you talking about, buddy? What's wrong with you?" Art shook his head slowly. "Come on, Fede. It's time to stop blowing smoke up my cock. I honestly have no idea." "Bullshit!" Art bellowed, closing up with Fede, getting close enough to see the flecks of spittle flying off his lips spatter on Fede's face. "I've had enough bullshit, Fede." Abruptly, Fede lurched forward, sweeping Art's feet out from under him and landing on Art's chest seconds after Art slammed to the scratched and splintered hardwood floor. He pinned Art's arms under his knees, then leaned forward and crushed Art's windpipe with his forehead, bearing down. "You dumb sack of shit," he hissed. "We were going to cut you in after it was done. We knew you wouldn't go for it, but we were still going to cut you in. You think that was your little whore's idea? No, it was mine. I stuck up for you. But not anymore, you hear? Not anymore. You're through. Jesus, I gave you this fucking job. I set up the deal in Cali. Fuck off heaps of money. I'm through with you now. You're done. I'm ratting you out to VDT and I'm flying to California tonight. Enjoy your deportation hearing, you dumb Canuck Boy Scout." Art's vision had contracted to a fuzzy black vignette, with Fede's florid face in the center of it. He gasped convulsively, fighting for air. He felt his bladder go, hot urine streamed down his groin and over his thighs. An instant later, Fede sprang back from him, face twisted in disgust, hands brushing at his urine-stained pants. "Damn it," he said, as Art rolled onto his side and retched. Art got up on all fours, then lurched erect. As he did, the axe head in his pocket swung wildly and knocked against the glass pane beside his office's door, spiderwebbing it with cracks. Moving with dreamlike slowness, Art reached into his pocket, clasped the axe head, turned it in his hand so that the edge was pointing outwards. He lifted it out of his pocket and held his hand behind his back. He staggered to Fede, who was glaring at him, daring him to do something, his chest heaving. Art windmilled his arm over his head and brought the axe head down solidly on Fede's head. It hit with an impact that jarred his arm to the shoulder, and he dropped the axe head to the floor, while it fell with a thud, crusted with blood and hair for the first time in 200,000 years. Fede crumpled back into the office's wall, slid down it into a sitting position. His eyes were open and staring. Blood streamed over his face. Art looked at Fede in horrified fascination. He noticed that Fede was breathing shallowly, almost panting, and realized dimly that this meant that he wasn't a murderer. He turned and fled the office, nearly bowling Tanya Isayad over in the corridor. "Call an ambulance," he said, then shoved her aside and fled O'Malley House and disappeared into the Piccadilly lunchtime crowd. Chapter 29. I am sprung. Father Ferlinghetti hasn't been licensed to practice psychiatry in Massachusetts for 40 years, but the court gave him standing. The judge actually winked at me when he took the stand and stopped scritching on her comm as the priest said a lot of fantastically embarrassing things about my general fitness for human consumption. The sanitarium sent a single junior doc to my hearing, a kid so young I'd mistaken him for the hospital driver when he climbed into the van with me and gunned the engine. But no, he was a doctor who'd apparently been briefed on my case, though not very well. When the judge asked him if he had any opinions on Father Ferlinghetti's testimony, he fumbled with his comm while the father stared at him through eyebrows thick enough to hide a hamster in, then finally stammered a few verbatim notes from my intake interview, blushed, and sat down. "Thank you," the judge said, shaking her head as she said it. Gran, seated beside me, put one hand on my knee and one hand on the knee of Doc Sandor's brother-in-law, a hotshot Harvard Law postdoc, whom we'd retained as corporate counsel for a new limited liability corporation. We'd signed articles of incorporation the day before, after group. It was the last thing Doc Sandor did before resigning his post at the sanitarium to take up the position of Chief Medical Officer at Human Care, LLC, a corporation with no assets, no employees, and a sheaf of shit-kicking ideas for redesigning mental hospitals, using off-the-shelf technology, and a little bit of UE mojo. Chapter 30. Art was most of the way to the tube when he ran into Lester, literally. Lester must have seen him coming, because he stepped right into Art's path from out of the crowd. Art plowed into him, bounced off his dented armor, and would have fallen over had Lester not caught him and steadied him. "Art, isn't it? How you doing, mate?" Art gaped at him. He was thinner than he'd been when he'd tried to shake Art and Linda down in the doorway of the Boots, grimier and more desperate. His tone was just as bemused as ever, though. "Jesus Christ, Lester, not now! I'm in a hurry. You'll have to rob me later, all right?" Lester chuckled wryly. "Still a clever bastard. You look like you're having some hard times, my old son. Maybe that you're not even worth robbing, eh?" "Right, I'm skint. Sorry. Nice running into you. Now I must be going." He tried to pull away, but Lester's fingers dug into his biceps, emphatically, painfully. "Heard you ran into Tom. Led him a merry chase. You know, I spent a whole week in the Nick on account of you." Art jerked his arm again without effort. "You tried to rob me, Les. You knew the job was dangerous when you took it, all right? Now let me go. I've got a train to catch." "Holidays? How sweet. Thought you were broke, though." A motorized scooter pulled up in the curb lane beside them. It was piloted by a smart young policewoman with a silly foam helmet and outsized pads on her knees and elbows. She looked like the kid with the safety-obsessed mom who inflicts criminally dorky fashions on her daughter, making her the neighborhood laughingstock. "Everything all right, gentlemen?" Lester's eyes closed, and he sighed a put-upon sigh that was halfway to a groan. "Oh yes, officer," Art said. "Peter and I were just making some plans to see our auntie for supper tonight." Lester opened his eyes, then the corners of his mouth incremented upwards. "Yeah," he said, "that's right. Cousin Alphonse is here all the way from Canada, and Auntie's mad to cook him a proper English meal." The policeman sized them up, then shook her head. "Sir, begging your pardon, but I must tell you that we have clubs in London where a gentleman such as yourself can find a young companion, legally. We thoroughly discourage making such arrangements on the high street. Just a word to the wise, all right?" Art blushed to his ear-tips. "Thank you, officer," he said, with a weak smile. "I'll keep that in mind." The constable gave Lester a hard look, then revved her scooter and pulled out into traffic, her arm slicing the air in a sharp turn signal. "Well," Lester said, once she was on the roundabout, "Alphonse, seems like you've got a reason to avoid the law, too. Can we just call it even? I did you a favor with the law, you leave me be." "Oh, I don't know. Perhaps I should put in a call to our friend P.C. McGivens. He already thinks you're a dreadful tosser. If you've reason to avoid the law, McGivens would be bad news indeed, and the police pay very well for the right information. I'm a little financially embarrassed, me, just at this moment." "All right," Art said. "Fine. How about this? I will pay you 800 euros, which I will withdraw from an Instabank once I've got my ticket for the Channel train to Calais in hand and am ready to get onto the platform. I've got all of 15 quid in my pocket right now. Take my wallet and you'll have cab fare home. Accompany me to the train and you'll get a month's rent, which is more than the police will give you." "Oh, you're a villain, you are. What is it that the police will want to talk to you about, then? I wouldn't want to be aiding and abetting a real criminal. Could mean trouble." "I beat the piss out of my coworker, Lester. Now, can we go? There's a plane in Paris I'm hoping to catch." Chapter 31. I have a brand new translucent Sony Vedic, a Series 12. I bought it on credit. Not mine, mine's sunk. 6 months of living on plastic and kiting balance payments with new cards while getting the patents filed on 8 new gizmos that constitute Human Care's sole asset has blackened my good name with the credit bureaus. I bought it with the company credit card. The company credit card. Our local baby Amex rep dropped it off himself after Doc Sandor faxed over the signed contract from the Bureau of Health. $500,000 for a proof of concept install at the very same Route 128 nuthatch where I'd been treated. If that works, we'll be rolling out a dozen more installs over the next year. Smart doors, public drugs prescription stats, locator bracelets that let clients, I've been learning the nuthouse jargon and have forcibly remove patient from my vocabulary, discover other clients with similar treatment regimens on the ward. Bells and whistles galore. I'm cruising the Mass Pike with Human Care's first ever employee, who in turn is holding on to Human Care's first ever paycheck. Caitlin's husband has been very patient over the past 6 months, as she worked days fixing the ailing machinery at the sanitarium and nights prototyping my designs. He's been likewise patient with my presence on his sagging living room sofa, where I've had my nightly 10-hour repose faithfully since my release. Caitlin and I have actually seen precious little of each other, considering that I've been living under her roof. Doc Sandor's Cambridge apartment is hardly bigger than my room at the hospital, and between his snoring and the hard floor, I didn't even last a whole night there. We've communicated mostly by notes calmed to her fridge, and prototypes left atop my suitcase of day clothes, and sharp-edged toiletries at the foot of my makeshift bed, when she staggered in from her workbench while I snored away the nights. Come to think of it, I haven't seen much of Doc Sandor either. He's been holed up in his room, chatting away on the EST channels. I am well rested. I am happy. My back is loose, and my chi is flowing. I am driving my few belongings to a lovely 2-bedroom, one to sleep in, one to work in, flat, overlooking Harvard Square, where the pretty co-eds and their shaggy boyfriends tease one another in the technical argot of a dozen abstruse disciplines. I'm looking forward to picking up a basic physics, law, medicine, and business vocabulary just by sitting in my window with my calm, tapping away at new designs. We drive up to a toll plaza, and I crank the yielding, human-centric steering wheel towards the Easy Pass lane. The dealer installed the transponder and gave me a brochure explaining the Sony family's approach to maximum driving convenience. But as I approach the toll gate, it stays steadfastly down. The FedEx HUD flashes an instruction to pull over to the booth. A board attendant leans out of the toll booth and squirts his comm at me, and the HUD comes to life with an animated commercial for the new improved TunePay service, now under direct Mass Pike management. The TunePay scandal's been hot news for weeks now. Bribery, corruption, patent disputes. I've been gratified to discover that my name had been removed from the patent applications, sparing me the nightly hounding that Fede and Linda and her fucking ex had been subjected to on my comm as the legal net tightened around them. I ended up laughing so hard that Caitlin gets out of her car and walks around to my side, opening the door, and pulls me bodily to the passenger side. She serenely ignores the blaring of the horns from the aggravated, psychotic Boston drivers stacked up behind us, and walks back to the driver's side and takes the wheel. Thanks, I tell her, laying a hand on her pudgy, freckled arms. You belong in a loony bin, you know that? She says, punching me in the thigh harder than is strictly necessary. Oh, I know, I say, and dial up some music on the car stereo. The end. Acknowledgments. This novel was workshopped by the Cecil Street Irregulars, the Novelettes, and the Gibraltar Point Gang, and received excellent feedback from first readers on the EST preview list, especially Pat York. Likewise, I'm indebted to all the people who read and commented on this book along the way. Thanks to my editor Patrick Nielsen Hayden for reading this so quickly, minutes after I finished it. Likewise to my agent Don Maas. Thank you. Thanks to Irene Gallo and Shelley Eshkar for knocking 2 out of the park with the cover designs for my books. Thanks to my co-editors at Boing Boing and all the collaborators I've written with who've made me a better writer. Thanks, I suppose, to the villains in my life who inspired me to write this book rather than to do something ugly that I'd regret. Thanks to Paul Boutin for commissioning the Wired article of the same name. Thanks to the readers and bloggers and tribespeople who cared enough to check out my first book and liked it enough to check out this one. Thanks to the Creative Commons for the licenses that give me the freedom to say, some rights reserved.